Malicious Compliance cult leader said I'd never leave, so I escaped with his wife. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Marcus's voice cut through the silence of our evening reflection session. 23 pairs of eyes stared at me while I sat in the center of our makeshift circle, my hands trembling despite my best efforts to appear calm. "Look at this pathetic specimen," Marcus announced, his perfectly groomed beard framing the cruel smile I'd grown to despise over the past 6 years. Still crying over wanting to visit their dying grandmother. Still clinging to the poisonous bonds of the outside world. I wasn't crying. Not anymore. But the tears had been there an hour ago when I'd quietly asked if I could attend my grandmother's funeral. The same grandmother who'd raised me before Marcus found me broken and desperate at 17, promising purpose and belonging I'd never known. "Tell them, little lamb," Marcus continued, using the pet name that once made me feel special but now felt like a collar around my neck. "Tell them how you begged to abandon your true family here for some corpse who never really loved you." The words hit like physical blows, but something had shifted inside me during these months of watching Marcus's operation more carefully. Maybe it was turning 24 and realizing I'd spent my entire adult life in this compound. Maybe it was watching him counsel another 17-year-old girl behind closed doors while his wife Sarah sat in the front row, her jaw clenched with barely contained fury. "I asked permission to say goodbye to someone who raised me," I said quietly, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. Marcus's eyes flashed. He wasn't used to anything but immediate submission during these sessions. "Raised you into what?" "A weak, ungrateful child with no sense of loyalty or purpose. We saved you from that corrupt world, and this is how you repay us." He stood now, towering over my seated form as he began to pace. This was his element, public humiliation disguised as spiritual guidance. I could feel the energy in the room shift as everyone held their breath, grateful it wasn't them in the center circle tonight. "You want to know the truth?" Marcus's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper that meant he was building towards something big. "You're too weak and pathetic to ever survive in the outside world. You have no skills, no real education, no ability to function like a normal human being." My fingernails dug into my palms, but I kept my face blank. 6 years of practice had taught me that emotional reactions only fed him. "In fact," he continued, warming to his theme, "I guarantee that if you ever tried to leave this sanctuary, you'd die crawling back within a week. Probably less. You'd be on your knees at our gates, begging us to take back someone so fundamentally broken." The room was dead silent except for that infernal buzzing of the lights. Marcus stood there with his arms crossed, basking in what he thought was total victory. But as I sat there absorbing his words, something crystallized inside me. Not anger, anger was too hot, too obvious. This was colder. Sharper. "You're right," I said finally, looking up at him with what I hoped appeared to be defeat. "I'm sorry for being selfish. I belong here." Marcus smiled, completely satisfied. He had no idea he'd just handed me the perfect motivation for what I was about to do. What he also didn't know was that Sarah had been passing me notes for the past month, asking questions about the financial records I helped maintain. Questions that suggested Marcus's devoted wife was finally ready to see the truth about the man she'd married. The next morning, I knocked softly on Marcus's office door where Sarah was organizing his appointment calendar, one of the many menial tasks he'd assigned his wife while he played prophet to his followers. "Come in," she called, not looking up from her work. But when she saw it was me, her expression shifted to something cautious. Sarah had learned to be careful about who might be watching, who might report back to her husband about unauthorized conversations. I closed the door behind me and moved to the filing cabinet, pulling out the donation ledgers I was supposed to be updating. "I brought those records you asked about," I said quietly, placing a folder on her desk. "The ones that show where the emergency fund really goes." Sarah's hand stilled on her paperwork. The emergency fund was Marcus's latest scheme, money collected from families for urgent medical needs that somehow never materialized into actual medical care. Last month, while updating the books, I discovered where that money actually went, a luxury apartment downtown that none of the regular members knew about. "This is dangerous," Sarah whispered, but she pulled the folder toward her anyway. I'd been watching Sarah for months, noting the way her smile had become increasingly brittle during Marcus's sermons, how she flinched when he touched her in public, the dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Yesterday's humiliation session had clearly pushed her closer to some kind of breaking point. "He thinks I'm too weak to survive outside," I said, keeping my voice conversational while I organized files. "Maybe he's right. But I've been thinking about what survival really means." Sarah looked up at me sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean maybe survival isn't just about making it on your own. Maybe it's about taking back what was stolen from you." I paused, pretending to study a spreadsheet. "Maybe it's about making sure other people don't have to lose what you lost." She was quiet for a long moment, flipping through the financial records. Her face grew paler with each page. The apartment expenses, the jewelry purchases, the payments to something called Eden Entertainment Services that I discovered was an escort agency. "How long have you known about this?" she asked finally. "The financial stuff?" "A few months. I help maintain the books, remember? Marcus trusts me because he thinks I'm too pathetic to do anything with the information." I met her eyes directly. "But there's more than just money missing, isn't there?" Sarah's composure cracked slightly. "The new girls," she said so quietly I almost couldn't hear her. "He tells me they need special counseling. That I wouldn't understand the spiritual work he's doing with them." 17-year-old Emma has been having those special sessions for 3 weeks now, I said carefully. Just like Jessica did before her family pulled her out. Just like Amy did before she had that nervous breakdown. The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications neither of us wanted to voice directly. Sarah closed the folder with shaking hands. "Even if what you're suggesting is true," she said finally, "where would someone like me go? I've been here 8 years. I have no money of my own, no family left." He made sure of that. This was the moment I'd been building toward. What if you weren't alone? What if someone else was planning to leave anyway, and they needed help carrying evidence that could protect other people from him? Sarah stared at me for a long moment. Outside, we could hear Marcus's voice carrying across the compound as he led the morning meditation, completely unaware that his two most trusted members were plotting his downfall. "How?" she whispered. I smiled for the first time in months. Very carefully. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah and I developed a careful rhythm of secret communication. We used the compound's own systems against Marcus. She would leave financial documents in specific filing cabinets for me to accidentally discover during my bookkeeping duties, while I slipped her notes hidden inside the daily meal planning folder she managed. What we uncovered was worse than either of us had imagined. Marcus hadn't just been stealing donation money for personal luxuries. He'd been systematically draining the life savings of elderly members by convincing them to invest in fake overseas missions. Mrs. Patterson, who joined after her husband died, had handed over her entire retirement fund believing it would build schools in Guatemala. That money had actually purchased Marcus a new BMW. But it was the personnel files that made my blood run cold. Marcus kept detailed psychological profiles on every member, noting their weaknesses, family connections, and what he called their leverage points, essentially a manipulation handbook for keeping people trapped. My file was 3 pages long, filled with observations about my abandonment issues and desperate need for approval. Listen to this, Sarah whispered during one of our clandestine meetings in the storage room. She read from a document labeled Retention Strategies. Subject responds well to public humiliation followed by private reassurance. Recommends cycle of degradation and false intimacy to maintain psychological dependence. My hands clenched involuntarily. 6 years of calculated abuse, all mapped out like a business plan. But our investigation hit a major snag when Brother David knocked on the storage room door while we were photocopying financial records. Marcus wants to see both of you, he announced, his tone unreadable. Now. Sarah and I exchanged a quick glance. She managed to slip the original documents back into their folder while I shoved the copies under a stack of supply invoices, praying David hadn't noticed the photocopier's warm hum. We found Marcus in his office, sitting behind his massive oak desk, another donation from a member's family estate. His expression was calm, which somehow felt more threatening than his usual theatrical anger. Sit, he commanded, gesturing to 2 chairs positioned directly across from him. The setup felt deliberately intimidating, like a corporate boardroom designed to make visitors feel small. Marcus steepled his fingers and studied us both for an uncomfortable moment. I've been thinking about loyalty lately, he began, his voice deceptively conversational. About how some people can share a home, a mission, even a marriage, and still harbor secret doubts about their commitment. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my expression to remain neutral. Sarah, darling, Marcus continued, turning his attention to his wife. Brother James mentioned you've seemed distracted during evening prayers. Unfocused. Is there something troubling your spirit? Sarah's training kicked in immediately. I've been worried about the kitchen budget, she replied smoothly. The cost of feeding everyone is increasing, and I want to make sure we're being good stewards of the community's resources. It was a perfect deflection, showing concern for practical matters while appearing spiritually minded. But Marcus wasn't satisfied. And you, he said, swiveling toward me, have been spending quite a bit of time in the administrative areas lately. More than your bookkeeping duties require. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I could feel Sarah tense beside me, but we'd prepared for this possibility. I've been trying to organize our filing system more efficiently, I said. After last month's reflection about being better servants, I wanted to contribute more meaningfully to our community's operations. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. How wonderfully dedicated of you both. He stood and walked to his window, hands clasped behind his back. Of course, if anyone were planning something foolish, something that might harm our family here, I'd be very disappointed. Disappointed enough to make some difficult decisions about their future with us. The threat was crystal clear. You know, Marcus continued, still facing the window, I've been receiving some interesting reports from our family members. Reports about whispered conversations and unusual interest in administrative matters. My mouth went dry. Someone had been watching us. Brother Thomas mentioned seeing you two in deep conversation by the filing cabinets yesterday, Marcus said, turning back to face us. And Sister Rebecca noticed some of our financial documents seemed disorganized after your last bookkeeping session. The blood drained from my face. Rebecca handled the donation records, and if she'd noticed our careful rearrangements, we were in serious trouble. Sarah remained perfectly still beside me, but I could see her knuckles turning white where she gripped her chair. I was teaching Sarah about our record-keeping system, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. She asked to understand it better so she could help if needed. How thoughtful, Marcus replied, but his tone suggested anything but gratitude. Sarah, is that accurate? Sarah nodded, meeting his gaze directly. I wanted to be more useful. Sometimes I feel like I'm not contributing enough to our mission. It was a brilliant response, playing into Marcus's ego while appearing humble. But I could see something calculating in his expression that made my skin crawl. Well then, Marcus said, settling back into his chair, I have wonderful news. I've decided to restructure our administrative responsibilities. Sarah, you'll be taking over the children's education program full-time. And you, he pointed at me, will be transitioning to grounds maintenance exclusively. My heart sank. He was separating us, cutting off our access to the records we needed. Worse, the grounds maintenance crew worked from dawn to dusk with barely any breaks. I'd have no opportunity for secretive meetings or document gathering. Additionally, Marcus continued, I think it would be beneficial for both of you to undergo some intensive spiritual counseling. Individual sessions with me, starting tonight. We need to address these feelings of restlessness. The room felt like it was closing in around us. Marcus's individual counseling sessions were legendary among the members, hours of psychological manipulation designed to break down whatever resistance someone might be harboring. People emerged from them hollow-eyed and completely compliant. Of course, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Whatever you think is best. Excellent. Sarah, you'll meet me here at 8. And you, he looked at me, will join me at 10. We have much to discuss about your recent, spiritual confusion. As we left his office, I felt the walls of my plan crumbling. Not only had Marcus figured out we were up to something, but he was moving to neutralize us before we could act. The copies we'd made were still hidden in the storage room, but without access to the administrative areas, we couldn't gather the additional evidence we needed. Walking across the compound courtyard, I noticed other changes too. Brother David was positioned near the main gate, unusual for midday. Sister Rebecca was watching us from the kitchen window. Even Emma, the 17-year-old who'd been receiving Marcus's special counseling, seemed to be keeping track of our movements. Marcus had activated his network of informants. We were being monitored. That afternoon, as I reported to groundskeeping duty, the reality of our situation hit me fully. Marcus hadn't just discovered our investigation, he'd outmaneuvered us completely. Tonight's counseling sessions would likely break whatever resolve Sarah had managed to build, and by tomorrow, she'd probably be reporting my escape plans directly to him. But as I pushed a wheelbarrow full of mulch past the storage building, I realized something Marcus had overlooked in his rush to control us. He thought he was dealing with the same broken teenager he'd recruited 6 years ago. He had no idea that his public humiliation had created something much more dangerous than a compliant follower. Tonight's session might be my last chance, but I wasn't going down without taking his whole empire with me. The 8 o'clock hour approached like an executioner's footsteps. I watched from my dormitory window as Sarah walked across the courtyard toward Marcus's office, her shoulders rigid with dread. She'd managed to catch my eye for just a moment during dinner, and the fear I saw there nearly broke my resolve. By 9:30, she still hadn't emerged. I paced my small room, running through contingency plans that felt increasingly desperate. The storage room copies were our only leverage now, but without Sarah's access to Marcus's personal files, we'd never get enough evidence to bring him down. Worse, if tonight's session broke her completely, she might confess everything we discovered. A soft knock interrupted my spiraling thoughts. "It's time," Brother David announced through my door. Marcus's office felt different at night, shadows pooled in corners where afternoon sunlight usually reached, and the overhead lamp created harsh angles across his face. Sarah was nowhere to be seen, but I caught a whiff of her lavender perfume lingering in the air. Whatever had happened during her session, it had ended recently. "Please, sit," Marcus said, his voice unnaturally gentle. This was how it always started, false kindness before the psychological dismantling began. "I want you to know that I'm not angry," he continued, settling back in his chair. "Disappointed, perhaps, but not angry. You're young, and young people sometimes lose their way." I remained silent, having learned that early responses only gave him ammunition. "Sarah told me about your conversations," he said, watching my face carefully. "About your doubts regarding our mission here. Your questions about our financial stewardship." My stomach dropped. Sarah had broken already. "She's very concerned about you," Marcus continued. "She believes you've been struggling with some dangerous thoughts about leaving our family. About abandoning the only real home you've ever known." But something in his tone felt off. Too rehearsed, like he was reciting lines rather than revealing genuine information. I'd heard Marcus lie enough times to recognize the subtle tells, the way he touched his beard when fabricating details, the slight pause before delivering false emotional beats. "She suggested that perhaps you've been feeling overwhelmed by your administrative responsibilities," he said. "That the financial records have been causing you anxiety about our community's stability." I fought to keep my expression neutral, but internally, relief flooded through me. Sarah hadn't broken, she'd fed him a carefully constructed half-truth that explained our behavior without revealing our real investigation. The anxiety about financial records was plausible enough that Marcus could build his manipulation around it without suspecting the deeper truth. "Is that accurate?" Marcus asked. "Have you been worried about our community's financial health?" This was my chance to play into his narrative while protecting our real plan. "Yes," I said quietly. Some of the numbers seemed confusing. I wasn't sure if I was doing something wrong with the bookkeeping. Marcus's posture relaxed slightly. "Ah, that explains so much. You've been carrying this burden alone, letting it fester into doubt about our entire mission." He leaned forward, adopting his fatherly counselor persona. "Let me ease your mind, dear one. Our finances are perfectly sound. What you perceive as irregularities are simply sophisticated financial instruments that ensure our community's long-term stability. Investment strategies that someone without advanced training might misinterpret." The audacity was breathtaking. He was explaining away his theft as financial sophistication. "The apartment expenses, for instance," he continued, "support a safe house for members who need temporary housing during their transition to full community life. The payments you question fund outreach programs that bring new souls to our mission." Every word was a lie, but delivered with such confident authority that I could see how members remained trapped. Marcus didn't just steal money and manipulate people, he created entire alternate realities where his crimes became virtues. "I want you to stop worrying about these administrative details," he said firmly. "Your spiritual development is far too important to be derailed by worldly concerns you're not equipped to understand." As the session continued, I realized something crucial. Marcus's arrogance was his weakness. He was so convinced of his superiority that he couldn't imagine us seeing through his explanations. He thought he'd neutralized our investigation with smooth words and position changes, never suspecting that we'd already gathered enough evidence to destroy him. "Now," Marcus said, checking his watch, "let's discuss this fantasy about leaving our family." The words hit me like ice water. Marcus knew about my escape plans, but how much did he really know? "Sarah mentioned you've been having dreams about the outside world," he continued, that predatory smile spreading across his face. "Fantasies about what you imagine life could be beyond our sanctuary." I forced myself to breathe normally. Sarah was still protecting us, feeding him believable misdirection while he thought he was extracting confessions. Sometimes, I admitted, knowing denial would seem suspicious. "But they're just wondering. Not real plans." "Of course they're not real plans," Marcus laughed, but there was cruelty underneath. "Because we both know what would happen if you actually tried, don't we? Remember what I told you just 2 weeks ago during our reflection session?" The humiliation came flooding back, his declaration that I was too weak and pathetic to survive outside, that I'd come crawling back within a week. At the time, those words had crystallized my determination to prove him wrong. Now I realized he'd been laying groundwork, creating psychological anchors to keep me trapped. "I remember," I said softly. "Good. Because I meant every word." Marcus stood and moved to his bookshelf, pulling down a thick folder. "Do you know what this is?" My blood turned cold as I recognized my personal file, the one containing 6 years of psychological manipulation strategies. This documents every conversation we've had, every breakthrough in your spiritual development, every setback in your emotional growth. He flipped through pages with casual cruelty. You've made remarkable progress from the broken teenager who arrived here, but you're still fundamentally fragile. Still dependent on the structure we provide. He pulled out a specific page, holding it where I could see my name at the top but not the content. For instance, your attachment disorder manifests in desperate people-pleasing behaviors. Your abandonment trauma creates panic responses when faced with uncertainty. Your complete lack of real-world experience has left you essentially infantilized despite your chronological age. Each clinical description felt like a blow, partially because some of it was true. Marcus had spent years studying my vulnerabilities, documenting them, weaponizing them. But here's what truly concerns me, he continued, settling back into his chair with the file open. Sarah mentioned that during your conversations about finances, you expressed interest in helping other people who might be struggling with similar doubts. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. This wasn't about my escape plans, this was about my influence on other members. I wasn't trying to cause problems, I said carefully. Of course you weren't. Your intentions are always pure, which is exactly what makes you dangerous. Marcus's voice hardened. You have no idea how much damage confused questions can cause in a spiritual community. How easily doubt spreads like an infection. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine. Tell me about your conversation with Brother Michael last week. The one by the vegetable garden. My mind raced. Michael was one of the newer members, maybe 18 months in a community. We'd barely spoken beyond basic pleasantries about garden maintenance. Unless. I don't remember any significant conversation, I said honestly. Really? Because Michael came to me very concerned about some comments you made regarding member donations. Suggestions that he should keep track of his financial contributions. The accusation was completely fabricated, but delivered with such conviction that I almost doubted my own memory. This was Marcus's genius, mixing real observations with fictional scenarios until his victims couldn't distinguish truth from manipulation. I never said anything like that, I replied, but Marcus was already moving on. And then there's the incident with Sister Jennifer. Your questions about her son's medical treatment fundraiser. Your suggestion that she should verify how the money was being used. Another complete lie, but I could see the pattern now. Marcus was constructing a narrative where my financial questions had metastasized into community-wide rebellion. He was building justification for whatever punishment he planned to implement. I think what's happening, Marcus said, closing my file with finality, is that your spiritual confusion has evolved into something more serious. You're not just doubting your own commitment, you're actively undermining other people's faith. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing closer. Outside, I could hear the night sounds of the compound, doors closing, footsteps on gravel, the distant hum of conversation from the common areas. Normal sounds of a community settling into evening routines, completely unaware that their leader was systematically destroying someone just 50 feet away. This requires immediate intervention, Marcus announced, reaching for his phone. Starting tomorrow, you'll be placed in spiritual isolation until we can address these destructive tendencies. Spiritual isolation. I'd seen what happened to people who disappeared into Marcus's isolation protocol. They emerged weeks later as hollow shells, completely broken and absolutely obedient. If he locked me away tomorrow, Sarah would be left alone to face whatever consequences he'd planned for her. Our evidence would remain hidden in the storage room, useless. Marcus would continue his cycle of abuse and theft indefinitely. But as Marcus dialed his phone, presumably to arrange my imprisonment, I realized something he'd overlooked in his rush to neutralize me. He was so focused on the threat he thought I represented that he hadn't considered the threat I actually posed. The session wasn't over yet, and I still had one card left to play. As Marcus held the phone to his ear, waiting for someone to answer, I made a decision that would either save us or destroy everything. There's something else you should know, I said quietly. Marcus paused mid-dial, his eyes narrowing. Oh. About Sarah's real concerns. The ones she didn't tell you about tonight. It was a complete gamble. I had no idea what Sarah had actually said during her session, but Marcus's reaction told me everything I needed to know. His hand tightened on the phone, and something predatory flickered across his face. Go on, he said, setting the phone down. She's been asking about Emma, I continued, my heart hammering against my ribs. About the special counseling sessions. She wanted me to help her understand why you meet with the younger girls alone so often. Marcus went very still. In 6 years, I'd never seen him look genuinely rattled, but something shifted behind his eyes now. Sarah knows better than to question spiritual guidance methods. She does, I agreed. But she's also a woman watching her husband spend hours behind closed doors with 17-year-old girls. Even the most devoted wife might have questions. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Marcus was calculating, trying to determine how much damage Sarah's suspicions might cause if they spread to other members. Especially the parents of younger girls. What exactly did she ask you to find out, he said finally. This was the moment. I could feel the entire future balancing on my next words. She wanted me to check the scheduling records. To see how often these sessions happen, how long they last. She thought if she could understand the pattern, she could better support your spiritual work. It was brilliant misdirection, presenting Sarah's investigation as supportive curiosity rather than growing suspicion. But Marcus wasn't buying it completely. And what did you discover in these scheduling records? That Emma has had 12 private sessions in 3 weeks. Jessica had 15 before her family removed her. Amy had 18 before her breakdown. I met his eyes directly. Sarah wanted to know if this was normal spiritual development or if something else was happening. Marcus stood slowly, moving around his desk until he loomed over my chair. The friendly counselor mask had completely disappeared, replaced by something cold and dangerous. You realize what you're implying, he said softly. I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you what your wife asked me to investigate. My wife, Marcus repeated, who has been perfectly content with our spiritual practices for 8 years, suddenly develops concerns about methodologies she's never questioned before. The skepticism in his voice was dangerous, but I pressed forward. Your wife who's been watching you replace her with younger and younger women. Who sleeps alone most nights while you conduct emergency counseling sessions? Who's been asked to manage children's education while you handle all the individual spiritual development personally? Each word hit like a physical blow. Marcus's face flushed red, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Sarah has never expressed any such concerns to me, he said through gritted teeth. Because she's terrified of you, I replied, letting some real emotion bleed into my voice. Just like the rest of us. She asked me to investigate because she knew questioning you directly would result in one of these sessions. Marcus grabbed the phone again, his movements sharp with barely contained rage. We'll see about that. Sarah and I are going to have another conversation tonight. A much more honest one. My blood turned to ice. If Marcus dragged Sarah back here now, convinced that she'd been lying about her suspicions, he'd break her completely. Worse, he might discover that our investigation had gone far deeper than scheduling records. But as Marcus started dialing, the office door burst open without warning. Marcus. Brother David's voice was urgent, panicked. We have a problem. The police are at the front gate. The phone slipped from Marcus's hand, clattering onto his desk. For a split second, his carefully constructed mask of absolute control cracked completely, revealing something raw and panicked underneath. What do they want? He demanded, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Brother David glanced nervously between Marcus and me, clearly uncomfortable delivering bad news in front of someone who wasn't part of the inner circle. They're asking about Emma Rodriguez. Her parents filed a missing person report. My heart stopped. Emma, the 17-year-old who'd been receiving Marcus's special counseling, had parents on the outside who actually cared enough to involve authorities. This wasn't part of our plan, but it might be the break we desperately needed. Marcus's face cycled through several emotions before settling on cold calculation. Emma is here voluntarily. She's an adult member of our community. She's 17, Brother David said quietly. And her parents have documentation that she was supposed to return home 3 days ago. The silence in the room was deafening. I watched Marcus's mind work, weighing options, calculating risks. Emma must have lied about her age when she joined, or Marcus had simply chosen to ignore inconvenient details about parental consent and legal guardianship. Where is Emma now? Marcus asked. In her dormitory. Should I? No. Marcus cut him off sharply. Don't do anything. Tell Brother Thomas to explain to the officers that we're a religious community and Emma is participating in a spiritual retreat. Emphasize that she's here voluntarily and can leave at any time. But his hands were shaking slightly as he straightened his desk, and I caught the tremor in his voice. Marcus was scared. Actually, genuinely frightened for perhaps the first time since I'd known him. What if they want to speak with her directly? David pressed. Then we accommodate them, of course. We have nothing to hide. Marcus's attempt at confidence fell flat. But first, I want you to quietly gather all of Emma's personal documentation and bring it to me. Her intake forms, her statement of voluntary participation, everything. As David hurried out, Marcus turned back to me with renewed venom. This is what happens when people start asking the wrong questions. When doubt spreads through our community like poison. I forced my expression to remain neutral, but internally I was calculating frantically. If the police were here about Emma specifically, they might not know about the financial crimes or the systematic abuse of other members. But if someone could get them the evidence Sarah and I had gathered. You think this is connected to your investigation into scheduling records? Marcus continued, his paranoia evident. Someone else Sarah might have spoken to about her concerns. The accusation was wild, but his desperation was making him see conspiracies everywhere. I only looked at what she asked me to check, I said carefully. Marcus grabbed his phone again, but this time he was calling someone else. Rebecca? I need you to go through all of our member files immediately. Look for any irregularities, any documents that might seem problematic if reviewed by outside authorities. He was trying to sanitize the records. The same files that contained evidence of financial fraud and psychological manipulation profiles were about to be scrubbed clean. And Rebecca, Marcus continued, I want you to review our current intake procedures. Make sure all member documentation clearly establishes voluntary adult participation in our community. As he hung up, Marcus's gaze fell back on me with renewed suspicion. You realize that if authorities start investigating our community over these misunderstandings, it will destroy everything we've built here. Families will be separated. People who found genuine spiritual peace will be forced back into a toxic outside world. He was already constructing the narrative that would make us the villains for any cooperation with law enforcement. Classic Marcus, twist reality until his victims felt guilty for their own liberation. I want you to think very carefully about your loyalty right now, he said, moving closer. About whether you're part of this family or part of the problem. Because depending on how tonight unfolds, I may need to know exactly where you stand. Outside, I could hear vehicles in a compound courtyard. The police presence was real and immediate. Whatever happened in the next few hours would determine not just the success of our escape plan, but potentially the fate of everyone trapped in Marcus's web. The evidence Sarah and I had gathered was still hidden in the storage room, but with police already on the grounds, getting access to it would be nearly impossible. Unless. I should return to my dormitory, I said, standing slowly. Stay out of the way while you handle this situation. Marcus studied me for a long moment, clearly torn between keeping me under direct supervision and needing to manage the crisis outside. Yes, he said finally. But I want to see you first thing tomorrow morning. We have much more to discuss about your recent, spiritual confusion. As I reached the door, Marcus's voice stopped me cold. And if I discover that tonight's police visit has anything to do with the questions you and Sarah have been asking, there will be consequences neither of you are prepared to face. The threat hung in the air like smoke as I stepped into the hallway, my mind racing with possibilities and dangers in equal measure. The compound felt electric with tension as I walked across the courtyard toward my dormitory. Police vehicles sat just inside our front gate, their red and blue lights casting eerie shadows across buildings I'd called home for 6 years. Officers stood near the main entrance talking with Brother Thomas, their uniforms stark against the flowing robes our community favored. I could see curtains twitching in dormitory windows, other members watching this unprecedented invasion of our isolated world. In 6 years, law enforcement had never set foot on our grounds. Marcus's careful selection of location and legal structures had always kept us invisible to outside scrutiny. But as I approached the dormitory building, a figure stepped out of the shadows near the storage room. Sarah's face was pale in the moonlight, her eyes wide with something between terror and determination. "We need to talk," she whispered urgently. "Now." I glanced toward Marcus's office, where I could see his silhouette pacing behind drawn curtains. Brother David was hurrying across the courtyard with an armload of files, clearly implementing damage control. Everyone was distracted by the police presence. Sarah led me around the back of the storage building, out of sight from the main compound. Her hands were shaking as she pulled a manila envelope from inside her jacket. "I got them," she breathed. During my session with Marcus, while he was busy breaking me down psychologically, I managed to photograph his personal files. My heart nearly stopped. How? He keeps his phone on his desk during sessions, power move, showing how important he is. When he went to pour himself water, I used the camera. Bank statements, correspondence with his lawyer, member psychological profiles he thought were secure. She pulled out several printed photographs, the images grainy but readable in the dim light. My breath caught as I recognized account numbers and transaction records showing hundreds of thousands in diverted funds. "Sarah, this is incredible, but..." "There's more," she interrupted, her voice tight with urgency. "Emma isn't the only underage member. There are 3 others who lied on their intake forms or whose documentation Marcus falsified. If the police start looking closely at our records..." The implications hit me like a freight train. Marcus hadn't just been collecting vulnerable adults, he'd been systematically targeting minors, manipulating their paperwork to avoid parental consent requirements. The special counseling sessions took on an even more sinister dimension. "We have to get this to the police," I said, reaching for the photographs. Sarah jerked them back. "It's not that simple. Look at this." She showed me another image, a letter with official letterhead that made my blood run cold. The State Attorney General's office, thanking Marcus for his generous contributions to the Children's Protection Fund and praising his commitment to family values. "He's been buying political protection," Sarah whispered. "State officials, local judges, even some law enforcement. If we walk out there and hand this to random patrol officers, it could disappear into the same system that's been covering for him." The sound of approaching footsteps made us both freeze. Someone was walking around the building, their shoes crunching on gravel. We pressed ourselves against the storage room wall, holding our breath as Brother James's voice carried through the night air. "Check the dormitories twice. Everyone's accounted for except..." His voice faded as he moved past our hiding spot. "They're looking for people," I whispered. "Marcus is doing head count, making sure no one talks to the police without supervision." Sarah nodded, sliding the photographs back into her envelope. "He told me during my session that if anyone cooperates with outside authorities, they'll be expelled immediately. Thrown out with nothing, blacklisted from any support network. It was brilliant manipulation, using people's dependence on the community as leverage to ensure their silence. Members who'd surrendered their outside lives had nowhere to go if Marcus withdrew his protection. But the police are already here," I pointed out. "If we approach them directly, with stolen documents and accusations against someone who has official friends, they'll arrest us for theft and dismiss everything else as disgruntled member complaints." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "I've been thinking about this for 2 hours. There's no clean way out. The weight of our situation settled over me like a suffocating blanket. We finally had evidence that could destroy Marcus's operation, but no safe way to deliver it. The police presence that had seemed like salvation might actually make our escape more impossible." Then I heard something that made my heart stop, Marcus's voice, much closer than it should be, talking to someone just around the corner of our building. "Need a complete inventory of all storage areas. I want to know if anything is missing, anything that might have been removed without authorization." Sarah's eyes met mine in pure panic. The evidence we'd hidden, the copies we'd made, Marcus was about to discover everything. Footsteps circled closer to our hiding spot as Marcus's voice grew clearer. "Brother David, I want you personally to search every storage container. Look for any documents that shouldn't be there, any evidence of unauthorized copying." My stomach plummeted. The photocopied financial records we'd hidden were about to be discovered, and when they were, Marcus would know exactly who had been investigating him. Sarah grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin as we listened to David's reluctant acknowledgement. "What if someone took them off the property already?" David asked. "Then we have bigger problems," Marcus replied coldly. "But I doubt our little conspirators have been that clever. They're probably hidden somewhere they thought was safe." The sound of the storage room door opening made Sarah's face go white. Metal containers clanged as David began his systematic search, each sound marking our countdown to exposure. We had maybe minutes before he found our evidence cache. "We have to run," Sarah breathed, barely audible. "Right now, while everyone's distracted." But even as she said it, we could hear voices throughout the compound. Marcus had members positioned everywhere, ostensibly to assist with the police inquiry but actually to monitor for anyone trying to leave. Brother Thomas was stationed near the main gate where the officers waited. Sister Rebecca had emerged from the administrative building, clearly visible in the courtyard. Even the dormitory entrances had people casually standing guard. "Look," I whispered, pointing toward the fence line where our property bordered the woods. "The old maintenance gate. No one's watching it because it's been broken for months." Sarah followed my gaze to a section of chain-link fence partially hidden by overgrown bushes. The gate had been damaged in a storm last winter and never properly repaired. It looked secure from a distance but could be pushed open with enough force. "Even if we get through," she whispered back, "where do we go? We have no car, no money, and Marcus will report us as mentally unstable runaways. Plus the evidence will be destroyed." The sound of containers being opened grew closer. David was working methodically through the storage room, and our hiding spot behind the building wouldn't protect us much longer. Then inspiration hit me like lightning. "The police," I said urgently. "We don't have to convince them tonight. We just have to make sure the evidence survives." Sarah looked confused, but I was already pulling out my phone, an ancient device Marcus allowed for emergency community use, but which I'd carefully avoided activating. "I'm going to email these photos to every news outlet, legal aid organization, and federal agency I can find. Even if Marcus destroys the originals and silences us, the information will be out there. The compound blocks outside internet, Sarah reminded me desperately. But the police vehicles don't. I pointed toward the gate where officers were still interviewing Brother Thomas. Emergency vehicles have their own communication systems. If I can get close enough to piggyback on their signal. A crash from inside the storage room made us both jump. David had found something, maybe not our specific cache, but close enough that discovery was imminent. Go, Sarah whispered, pressing the envelope of photographs into my hands. I'll create a distraction, keep them busy while you reach the fence. What about you? Her smile was sad but determined. I've been Marcus's wife for 8 years. I know exactly which buttons to push to make him forget about everything else. She paused, looking back toward his office. Besides, someone needs to make sure Emma and the other underage members get protected when this all comes out. Before I could protest, Sarah was walking deliberately toward the main courtyard, calling out in a voice loud enough to carry across the compound, Marcus. We need to talk about what I really discovered during my investigation. The effect was instantaneous. Marcus's voice cut through the night like a blade, Sarah. Get back here immediately. But she kept walking, now in full view of the police officers, her voice rising with each step. I found the bank records, Marcus. I know about the offshore accounts. The commotion that followed was everything I needed. Marcus came storming out of the shadows, Brother David abandoned his search to assist, and every member positioned around the compound turned toward the unfolding drama. Even the police officers looked up from their interviews, suddenly very interested in this domestic dispute. I ran for the maintenance gate, clutching the envelope of evidence in my phone, praying I could reach the woods before anyone noticed my escape. Behind me, Sarah's voice continued to ring out accusations that would ensure Marcus's complete focus remained on her. She was sacrificing herself to save both our investigation and my freedom, and we both knew Marcus's retaliation would be swift and merciless. The broken gate was only 50 feet away, but it felt like miles as I sprinted through the darkness. Everything we'd worked for balanced on whether I could disappear into the woods before Marcus realized his real enemy was escaping. The fence was closer than I'd thought, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the loose section of chain link. Behind me, Sarah's voice had turned into full-blown shouting, her accusations echoing across the compound like grenades going off. The apartment downtown. The escort services. The forged intake documents. Each revelation sent another shock wave through the gathered crowd. I could hear Marcus's voice rising in response, but couldn't make out his words over the blood pounding in my ears. The fence section finally gave way, opening just wide enough for me to squeeze through into the dark woods beyond. My phone screen glowed as I fumbled with the camera function, trying to photograph Sarah's evidence while crashing through underbrush. But when I finally got the internet connection active, my heart sank. I had signal, but the files were too large to upload quickly. Each photo would take minutes to send, and I could already hear voices back at the compound organizing a search. Then the sound I'd been dreading, Marcus's voice cutting through everything else with terrifying clarity. Find them. Both of them. Search every building, every vehicle. No one leaves this property until I have my wife and our confused little lamb back where they belong. The pet name that had once made me feel special now sounded like a death sentence echoing through the trees. I pressed deeper into the woods, but every step seemed to make noise that would give away my position. Branches caught at my clothes, roots tried to trip me, and somewhere behind me flashlight beams were beginning to sweep through the darkness. My phone buzzed with a low battery warning just as the first photo finished uploading to a legal aid website. 11 more images to go, and my power was dying. I forced myself to keep moving while the second file crawled toward completion, praying the ancient device would hold out long enough. A new sound made my blood freeze, dogs barking. Marcus had brought out the compound's guard dogs, animals trained to track and corner rather than attack, but terrifying nonetheless. Their howls were getting closer, which meant the search party had found my scent trail. The second photo uploaded just as I stumbled into a small clearing. Through the trees, I could see lights from a road, actual civilization beyond Marcus's controlled world. But between me and that road were at least a quarter-mile of dense forest, and the dogs were definitely closing in. I started the third upload while half running, half stumbling toward the distant lights. Behind me, flashlight beams were getting brighter, voices more distinct. Brother David was calling my name, his tone friendly and concerned, as if I were a lost child rather than an escaping prisoner. We just want to help you, he shouted. Marcus is worried about your mental state. The police want to ask you some questions. The lies came so naturally to them, but I could hear the real threat underneath. If they caught me now, I'd disappear into Marcus's spiritual isolation and never be seen again. Sarah would be dealt with separately, probably through some elaborate psychological breaking that would leave her completely compliant. My phone screen flickered as the battery dropped to 5%. Only 3 photos had uploaded successfully, and the fourth was stalling at 60%. I had evidence of financial fraud, but not the members' psychological profiles or the underage documentation that would really destroy Marcus's operation. The road was getting closer, but so were the voices behind me. And just as I thought I might actually make it to safety, a new complication emerged from the darkness ahead. 2 figures stepped out from behind trees directly in my path, blocking my route to the road. In the moonlight, I recognized Sister Rebecca and Brother James. Marcus had anticipated my escape route and positioned people to cut me off. There's nowhere to run, Rebecca called out, her voice gentle but firm. Come back with us, and Marcus promises there won't be any punishment. He just wants to help you work through this confusion. My phone battery died completely, taking with it any chance of uploading the remaining evidence. I was trapped between Marcus's pursuit team and his advance guard, holding useless photographs in the middle of dark woods, while Sarah faced whatever consequences her distraction had earned back at the compound. Everything we'd worked for was about to be lost. I clutched the envelope of photographs against my chest, my mind racing through impossible options. Rebecca and James were blocking the road, the search party was closing in behind me, and my dead phone meant our evidence would die with me if I got caught. But then I noticed something that made my heart skip, headlights moving along the road beyond the trees. Not just one vehicle, but several, their beams cutting through the darkness in a steady procession. Too many cars for this rural area at this time of night. Please, Rebecca called out again, taking a step closer. Marcus sent us to bring you home safely. He's very concerned about your emotional state. Behind me, the dog's barking was getting louder, more excited. They'd definitely found my trail. I had maybe 2 minutes before the whole search party converged on this clearing. Think about what you're doing, James added, his voice taking on that familiar cult cadence I'd heard for 6 years. You have no money, no identification, nowhere to go. The outside world doesn't care about someone like you. The same script Marcus had drilled into all of us, we were nothing without the community, helpless children who couldn't survive independence. But as those headlights continued moving along the road, I realized something they hadn't considered. Emma's parents hadn't just called the police about one missing teenager. They'd triggered something bigger. How many vehicles did you see at the front gate? I asked suddenly, my voice carrying clearly through the woods. Rebecca and James exchanged glances. Just the local officers, Rebecca said, but uncertainty crept into her tone. Why? Because there are at least 6 cars on that road right now, I replied, pointing toward the moving lights. And it's past midnight in the middle of nowhere. When was the last time you saw that much traffic out here? The doubt in their expressions was visible even in the moonlight. Marcus's followers were conditioned to obey without question, but they weren't stupid. The unusual activity was clearly bothering them, even if they couldn't articulate why. Emma wasn't the only underage member, I continued, taking a small step toward them while the search party crashed through the brush behind me. Her parents aren't the only ones who filed reports. How many families do you think have been looking for their missing children? You're confused, James said, but his voice lacked conviction. All our members are adults who joined voluntarily. Jessica was 16 when she arrived, I shot back. Amy was 17. Marcus has been forging intake documents for years, and tonight it finally caught up with him. The flashlight beams were getting brighter behind me, voices more urgent. But I could see doubt spreading across Rebecca's face as she processed what I was saying. She'd helped with member intake, she would know if the documentation had irregularities. Even if that were true, she said slowly, running away won't solve anything. We need to work together as a family to address any misunderstandings. But James was already pulling out his radio, trying to contact Marcus for instructions. The static that emerged told us everything we needed to know, whatever was happening back at the compound, normal communications were being jammed or monitored. That's when I heard the sound that changed everything, helicopters approaching from the distance, their rotors cutting through the night air with mechanical precision. Federal helicopters. The photographs Sarah had taken during her session with Marcus, she must have captured something that triggered more than just a local missing person investigation. The bank records, the political connections, the systematic targeting of minors, someone with real authority was taking this seriously. Rebecca's face went white as the helicopter sounds grew louder. This isn't possible, she whispered. Marcus has protection. He has arrangements with local officials, I finished. But if this goes federal, those arrangements don't matter anymore. The search party finally burst into the clearing behind me, Brother David leading 3 other men and 2 German shepherds straining at their leashes. But instead of triumph at cornering me, their faces showed the same dawning uncertainty I saw in Rebecca and James. What's happening? David panted, looking around at our group with confusion. Where's the backup from the compound? Nobody answered, because we could all see the helicopters now, dark shapes against the star-filled sky, searchlights beginning to sweep the forest around Marcus's property. The cult's perfect isolation was being shattered by forces none of us had anticipated. The helicopter searchlights swept across the treetops like mechanical angels, and I watched 6 years of Marcus's carefully constructed isolation crumble in real time. Brother David's radio crackled to life with panicked voices from the compound. All units return immediately. Federal agents at the main gate. Repeat, federal agents. The transmission cut to static, but we'd heard enough. Rebecca dropped her friendly facade completely, her face twisting with the kind of rage I'd only seen from Marcus himself. You did this, she snarled, advancing toward me. You and that treacherous wife of his. You destroyed everything we built. But before she could reach me, James grabbed her arm. Wait. Listen. In the distance, we could hear vehicles moving along the compound's access road, multiple engines, heavy and official. More importantly, we could hear voices calling through megaphones, though the words were too distant to make out clearly. They're evacuating the buildings, David whispered, his face pale in the helicopter searchlights. Marcus said this could never happen. He promised we were protected. The dogs had stopped barking, their attention diverted by the aircraft overhead. Even the animals seemed to sense that something fundamental had shifted in their world. I clutched Sarah's envelope of evidence, realizing that our desperate investigation had somehow triggered something far larger than we'd imagined. We need to get back, Rebecca decided, but her voice carried none of its usual authority. Marcus will have instructions. He'll know what to do. No, I said firmly, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. Marcus is done. Whatever arrangements he had, whatever protection he thought he'd bought, it's over. David's radio crackled again, this time with a voice none of US recognized. This is Agent Martinez, FBI. All individuals on the property are required to report to the main courtyard for processing. This includes anyone currently conducting searches or patrols. The federal agent's tone was professional but absolute. This wasn't a request or negotiation, it was a command backed by the full authority of the United States government. Processing, James repeated numbly. What does that mean? I knew exactly what it meant, even if they couldn't accept it yet. It means they're treating this as a criminal investigation. Everyone who was part of Marcus's operation is now a potential witness or accomplice. The reality hit them like cold water. Rebecca, David, James, they'd all participated in Marcus's system of control and manipulation. They'd helped isolate members from their families, enforced his psychological abuse protocols, and turned a blind eye to his financial crimes. Some of that participation might have been coerced, but federal investigators wouldn't make those distinctions immediately. But we were victims too, Rebecca protested, her voice cracking. We believed in the mission. We thought we were helping people. Tell that to the agents, I replied, but not without sympathy. Maybe they'll understand. Maybe they won't. But standing here in the woods isn't going to change what happens next. Another helicopter passed overhead, this one lower and slower, clearly searching for exactly the kind of group we represented, compound members who hadn't reported for federal processing. They're going to arrest us, David said with dawning horror. All of us. Even though we were just following Marcus's guidance. The helicopters were circling back now, their searchlights beginning to focus on our clearing. Someone had spotted us, and within minutes we'd be surrounded by federal agents with very specific questions about our activities tonight. I looked at the envelope in my hands, Sarah's evidence that had somehow set all of this in motion. Whatever happened next, I was about to face the outside world Marcus had always claimed would destroy me. Time to find out if he'd been right about my weakness, or if 6 years of his psychological prison had actually forged something stronger than he'd ever imagined. The helicopters circled closer, their searchlights turning our forest clearing into a makeshift interrogation room. I could see the fear spreading across the faces of Marcus's followers as the reality of federal investigation sank in. But before anyone could decide whether to surrender or run, David's radio erupted with a voice that made my blood freeze. All search teams, be advised, Sarah Martinez has barricaded herself in the administrative building with multiple hostages. Federal negotiators are en route, but the situation is escalating rapidly. My heart stopped. Sarah, who had sacrificed herself to create my escape, was now trapped with Marcus in what sounded like a desperate last stand. The hostages had to be the younger members, probably including Emma and the other underage girls whose documentation Marcus needed to protect. This is insane, James whispered, staring at the radio in horror. Marcus wouldn't. Marcus would do anything to avoid prison. I cut him off, but my voice was shaking. Everything we'd planned had gone sideways, and now Sarah was paying the price for our investigation. Rebecca grabbed my arm suddenly, her fingernails digging into my skin. You have to come back with us. If Marcus has hostages, you're the only one who might be able to talk him down. You know how his mind works. I know exactly how his mind works, I replied, pulling free from her grip. Which is why I know he's not planning to surrender. He's planning to disappear. The administrative building housed more than just records. It contained Marcus's private quarters, his personal safe, and most importantly, the underground tunnel system he'd had installed for emergency evacuations. Only his inner circle knew about the tunnels, but I discovered them months ago during my bookkeeping duties. What do you mean disappear? David demanded, his face pale in the harsh searchlight glare. He's got escape routes none of you know about. Offshore accounts, false identities, contingency plans for exactly this scenario. I looked up at the helicopters circling overhead. The hostage situation isn't about negotiation, it's about buying time to activate his exit strategy. Another transmission crackled through David's radio, subject appears to be destroying documents and computer equipment. Multiple fires reported inside the building. Hostages are visible in the main conference room. My stomach lurched as I pictured Sarah trapped while Marcus systematically eliminated evidence of his crimes. The financial records we'd photographed were just the beginning. His personal files contained psychological profiles on every member, documentation of systematic abuse, and records of political bribes that went far deeper than we'd imagined. The tunnel entrance is in his private office, I said suddenly, making a decision that terrified me. If I can reach the building through the woods, I might be able to get to the hostages before he escapes. That's suicide, Rebecca protested. The federal agents will shoot you on sight, and Marcus will kill you if he sees you coming. She was probably right, but the alternative was letting Sarah die for our investigation while Marcus vanished with evidence that could protect dozens of other victims. The photographs on my dead phone were useless without corroborating documentation, and if Marcus destroyed everything tonight, he might actually succeed in disappearing completely. Give me your radio, I told David, extending my hand. I'm going to contact the federal agents directly. Absolutely not, he said, clutching the device against his chest. Marcus specifically ordered. Marcus's orders don't matter anymore, I snapped. Look around you. Federal helicopters, evacuation commands, hostage situations, your cult leader's empire is burning down tonight, and you can either help save innocent people or go down with him. The radio crackled again with increasingly urgent updates about the standoff, each transmission making it clearer that time was running out for everyone trapped in that building. Including Sarah, who had risked everything to help me escape, and was now paying the ultimate price for believing we could expose Marcus's crimes. The helicopters descended like mechanical angels of justice as I grabbed David's radio, my hands steadier than they'd been in years. The searchlights illuminated our clearing with harsh clarity, and I could hear federal agents moving through the woods toward our position. Agent Martinez, this is a compound member, I spoke into the radio, using the emergency frequency I'd heard earlier. I have critical information about the hostage situation and Marcus's escape plans. Static filled the air for a moment before a crisp voice responded, identify yourself and your location. I'm in the woods southeast of the main building. Marcus has underground tunnels, he's not planning to surrender. He's buying time to escape while destroying evidence. Within minutes, federal agents had surrounded our group, their tactical gear and professional demeanor a stark contrast to the flowing robes and spiritual rhetoric I'd known for 6 years. Agent Martinez herself approached, her eyes sharp with intelligence and authority. You mentioned tunnels, she said without preamble. Show us. I led them through the forest toward the compound's rear perimeter, my heart hammering as we approached the building where Sarah was trapped. The administrative complex was ablaze with floodlights, federal vehicles positioned at strategic points around the structure. There, I pointed to a maintenance shed adjacent to Marcus's office. The tunnel entrance is hidden behind false panels. It connects to his private quarters and exits near the old quarry road about 2 miles north. Agent Martinez spoke rapidly into her headset, coordinating teams to seal off Marcus's escape route. But even as tactical units moved into position, smoke began pouring from the administrative building's windows. He's accelerating the timeline, I said, watching flames lick at the glass. The hostages are our priority, Martinez finished firmly. But we need more intelligence. What would motivate him to release them? I thought about 6 years of psychological manipulation, Marcus's desperate need for control, his pathological fear of being seen as weak or defeated. He won't release them voluntarily. But if he thinks he can still win, if he believes he has leverage, he might make a mistake. Through the building's main windows, I could see figures moving in the conference room. Sarah's distinctive silhouette was visible among what looked like 4 or 5 other people, probably the youngest members Marcus considered most valuable as human shields. That's when inspiration struck with crystal clarity. Let me talk to him, I said, turning to Agent Martinez. Not as a negotiator, as the pathetic failure he always said I was. Let me give him the chance to gloat, to prove his superiority one final time. Martinez looked skeptical, but before she could respond, Marcus's voice boomed across the compound through some kind of PA system. I know you're out there, little lamb. Still crawling back like I predicted. Ready to beg for forgiveness? Even now, facing federal charges and trapped with hostages, Marcus couldn't resist the opportunity to humiliate me publicly. His psychological need to dominate was stronger than his survival instinct. That's our opening, I told Martinez. His arrogance will destroy him. She handed me a radio connected to the federal communication system. You have 5 minutes to create an opportunity. Don't be a hero. I keyed the radio, letting 6 years of manufactured submission color my voice. Marcus. You were right about everything. I'm sorry I ever doubted you. His laughter echoed across the compound, filled with the same cruel satisfaction I'd endured through countless humiliation sessions. Of course I was right. Look at you, crawling back just like I said you would. The outside world chewed you up in what, 3 hours? Less than that, I replied, playing into his narrative. I was so scared, so lost. I need you to tell me what to do. Through the window, I could see Marcus moving closer to the glass, his ego pulling him away from the hostages and toward the spotlight of his imagined victory. Sarah caught my eye for just a moment, and I saw understanding flash across her face. Tell the federal agents you made it all up. Marcus commanded through the PA, tell them your investigation was lies born from mental illness. Confess that everything was your delusional fantasy. I'll do anything you want, I said into the radio. Just like always. But as Marcus positioned himself in full view of the federal snipers, basking in what he thought was total psychological victory, he made the fatal mistake I'd been counting on. He stepped away from the hostages to better savor his triumph. The building's lights cut out simultaneously as federal agents moved through the tunnels I'd revealed. Emergency lighting flickered on just as tactical teams breached both the conference room and Marcus's office, their coordination flawless and devastating. Marcus's voice cut off mid-gloat as reality crashed down around him. Within 20 minutes, Sarah emerged from the building under federal escort, physically unharmed but emotionally shaken. The other hostages, including Emma and 2 17-year-olds whose parents had been searching for months, were immediately surrounded by victim advocates and medical personnel. Marcus himself was led away in restraints, his face a mask of disbelief that his perfect system of control had crumbled so completely. You actually did it, Sarah whispered when she reached me, her voice filled with amazement and exhaustion. You got out, and you brought help back for the rest of us. I looked around at the compound that had been my prison for 6 years, now swarming with federal agents collecting evidence, interviewing victims, and documenting crimes that would put Marcus away for life. Members wandered in confusion as victim advocates explained their rights and offered assistance with housing, counseling, and reconnecting with families. We did it, I corrected her. Together. 3 months later, I testified at Marcus's trial, my voice steady as I described years of systematic psychological abuse and financial fraud. The evidence Sarah had gathered, combined with federal investigation, revealed a network of exploitation that had destroyed dozens of lives and stolen millions of dollars. Marcus received 47 years in federal prison. I received something far more valuable, proof that his predictions about my weakness had been completely wrong. The outside world didn't destroy me, it welcomed me home. And for the first time in my adult life, I was truly free.